yet again come.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to South Church. I am the Reverend Susan Suchocki Brown, and I am so glad that you are joining us this morning for our worship service. We are doing a virtual service, but nonetheless, we have all the components of a worship service right here for you this morning. And that happens with a lot of people pitching in and helping to make the best happen. This morning, I am joined by Joanne Connolly, our Director of Music Ministries, and by Jonathan Cummings, our Worship Associate. And also, the person delivering the message this morning is going to be Jim Verschueren. We are glad that you are here, whether it be your first time or your millionth time. We welcome you. You are not alone. Jonathan, will you fill us in on the rest of the people who make this possible?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Jonathan Cummings, and I'm one of a team of worship associates that assist with creating and providing services for South Church. Before our announcements, I want to acknowledge the South Church staff that's supporting us today, Music Director Joanne Connolly and Director of Lifespan Ministries Kirsten Hunter. The music today is graciously offered by Joanne Connolly, Susan Adams, Julie Dougherty, and South Church folk, and our story will be delivered by Joanne Piazzi. Welcome, one and all, to South Church. Thank you for visiting and sharing your Sunday morning with us. We invite everyone, first-time viewer or long-time member, to join us for a virtual social hour immediately after the service, where you can ask any questions you may have, reflect on the service, or just chat with a new or old friend. Our sermon today will be delivered by Jim Verschueren. I've had the pleasure of being paired with Jim before, and we are lucky enough to have him with us again today. I'm sure we are all in for a treat.
Don't forget that you can still purchase blooms in support of the Pocket Garden Tour that's been rescheduled to September of 2020. You can find out more information or purchase a bloom to be listed in the ticket brochure by visiting the South Church website. The Endowment Committee would like to remind everyone that if you have left a legacy gift to South Church, that you fill out the Penhallow Society form that can be found on our website. Even if you think that you filled the paperwork out in the past, please go to the planned giving page on the website and fill it out again. You can mail it back to the office or scan and email it back to us, and we'll be sure that the Endowment Committee receives your information. If you have any questions, you can reach out directly to them at endowment@southchurch-uu.org. Next Sunday is our traditional bridging worship service. And for our weekly photo challenge, we'd like to know what transitions our adult members are marking this year. We do have a separate plan for the kids, don't worry. Maybe you have a new home, a new job, are celebrating a milestone birthday, really anything that is a new transition for you this year. Please send a picture of yourself and a brief description of what you are bridging to Jen Del Deo by next Thursday morning. And her email is jendeldeo@southchurch-uu.org. And finally, a very special thank you to Beth Fisher for her generous donation of our portico flowers, and to Cindy Brown for planting them and making our church gardens look absolutely beautiful. We appreciate you both very much. Thank you.
Sun gonna shine on my back door someday. Sun gonna shine on my back door someday. Wind gonna rise up and blow all these blues away. Said I'm sorry for all I've done to you. Said I'm sorry for all I've done to you. I'm so sorry, what else can I do? Before I walk down that old road before I walk down that old road alone. I be kind to myself, 'cause forgiveness starts at home. I be kind to myself, 'cause forgiveness starts at home. I be kind to myself, 'cause forgiveness starts at home.
I'm not good at forgiveness, and mainly I blame this on a lack of practice. Thankfully, I think this is mostly because I am rarely angered or hurt by other people. This is not through any particular grace or luck, but because A, I don't see any reason to surround myself with people. Surround myself with people that I find disagreeable. And B, I'm far more likely to take a cooperative and go with the flow approach to things rather than an adversarial approach. I like this approach. I tend to brood on things when I get angered or offended, so it is nice to avoid those feelings, to provide myself the mental space to direct my thoughts as I desire. However, this approach comes at a cost. There's a threshold to my ability to ride things out, much like an ecosystem that is pushed beyond a tipping point. When pushed beyond my tolerance threshold, I struggle to return to my prior equilibrium. I think this may be the result of combining the stoic, analytical nature of my father's family with the more animated Irish and Italian aspects of my mother's. I don't commonly react by waving my hands around and exclaiming in the manner of a stereotypical Italian. Instead, I bottle it up, hoping to avoid those moments when my feelings burst through my mental dam. This works for me until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it really doesn't. As a child, I badly lost my temper in a local rec league soccer game. I was fouled repeatedly, and rather than react reasonably, I initiated a scuffle that escalated to the point I ripped an earring out of their ear without even knowing it. The game was supposed to be so low-key, there wasn't even a ref. And yet, by crossing my threshold, that ceased to matter. Sadly, I honestly can't say I have ever forgiven their initial offenses. I'm also still trying to find forgiveness from my former PhD advisor. It has been 6 years, yet it still takes me days to calm down enough to reply to any of their emails. And this is despite counseling and my desire to just move on. Perhaps the best way to close this line of thought is with this quote. Everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, always. Obviously, this is a standard that no one can achieve, but it helps me to remember this. Remembering it might also help you avoid pushing someone else beyond their threshold, or even better, surpassing your own. I light my chalice today, thinking of all the fires I have lit and experienced in my life. Fires that have heated rocks for the spiritual cleansing of the sweat lodge. Fires that have joined together friends and family and joined new families following a wedding. Fires that were a bit too explosive, singeing hair and eyebrow. And fires that spring forth the stories that unite us all. Please join me in reciting and practicing our mission statement. At South Church, we nurture spiritual growth through worship, learning, and community. We celebrate the worth and dignity of all people, and we inspire one another to act on our faith in the larger community.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joanne Piazzi, and I have a story for you today about a boy named Paul. Paul first met Jimmy when they were both in the first grade. They lived 2 houses apart, and Jimmy was the first friend that Paul made all on his own. They weren't in the same class, and their parents weren't friends. One day, Paul was out playing in his yard, and all of a sudden, Jimmy was just there, and they just played. So they were becoming friends when something happened. See, Paul had this big sandbox in his yard, really big, and he had a lot of trucks. His dad was a heavy equipment operator on a construction crew, so Paul had all the trucks. He knew all their names and what they did. So one day he was out there in the sandbox. He went out with a big plan. He was going to create a whole neighborhood with streets and houses. He'd been collecting cardboard boxes for the houses, and everyone was going to have a real dugout cellar hole. So he had the bulldozer, and he was clearing the sand piles for the road. When along came Jimmy. "Oh, good, the crew's here," said Paul. "I'm making the street, and when I get ready to put in a house, I'm going to show you where, and you can dig out the cellar hole." "Okay, boss," said Jimmy, and went Paul through the sand with the bulldozer. "All right, Jim, right here. Here's the spot. Get the excavator and start digging the cellar hole." And so Jimmy reached for one of the trucks and he started up the road that Paul had made. Paul looked over and saw what Jimmy was doing. He said, "No, stupid. That's not the excavator. That's a front end loader. That one's the excavator." And Paul looked at Jimmy. His face just fell. And right away, Paul knew that he should not have called Jimmy stupid. If his parents had heard him do that, they would have made him apologize right away. He knew inside that he should apologize, but he just couldn't seem to make the words come out. It can be really hard to say you're sorry sometimes. And now Jimmy had the right truck and he was digging the hole, so maybe he didn't really care that much anyway. And, you know, he had that little voice in his head that was repeating that phrase, "I was only kidding." So he let it go. They continued to play for a while, and then Jimmy's mom called him in for lunch, so he jumped up. "See ya," he said, and he ran off for his house. "Yeah, see ya," said Paul, and then he went in and he had his lunch. And later on, he went back outside and he decided that he felt really bad and he would apologize to Jimmy when he came back to play. But Jimmy didn't come back that afternoon. Paul thought about going over to Jimmy's house to apologize, but then his mother would find out what Paul had said, and if he hadn't told his mother, maybe it wasn't that big a deal, and then his own mother would find out what he had said, and then it would be really a really big deal. So he decided to wait until he saw Jimmy again. Well, the next day it rained, and nobody went out to play in the sandbox. The day after that, Paul told his mother that he really didn't feel like going out to play that day. And then the next day they had family errands to run. So it was 4 days later when Paul was looking out the window, and there in the street in front of Jimmy's house was a big moving truck. furniture was nearly filling the truck. And he saw Jimmy's mom and dad putting suitcases and boxes into their car. They were moving away. Paul had made Jimmy feel so bad that they didn't want to be his neighbors anymore. He knew he should have apologized, and now it was too late. He couldn't run out there and say he was sorry because they'd already made the decision to leave. And so he just stood there and watched as they got into their car and followed the moving van up the street and out of sight. Now, Jimmy's family didn't move away because of what Paul had said. They moved across town because the house that they were having built was finished. It wasn't really far away, but it was in a different neighborhood. And so Jimmy and Paul went to different schools. So Paul was off the hook, right? He was never going to see Jimmy, so he couldn't possibly apologize, and so he just had to forget about it. Well, Paul didn't really think about it very often, except every time he played with the excavator. But pretty soon, he outgrew his trucks and sandbox, so he forgot about it altogether. Well, then the day came when Paul was going to middle school. He was very excited and a little bit nervous. Middle school was going to be big, and there were going to be a lot of kids that he didn't know. Of course, he had his own friends from elementary school, but he didn't really have a best friend. He knew that eventually he was going to say something stupid. See, there's that word again. And he would hurt somebody's feelings, and they would move away, just like Jimmy had. Well, who do you think Paul saw on the very first day of middle school? Yep, Jimmy. He saw him in the lunchroom sitting at a table with his friends, talking and laughing. And Paul got this really strong, tight feeling in the pit of his stomach. And he didn't feel like eating his lunch anymore. And that made him mad. Here he was with a stomach ache. And there was Jimmy over there having lunch with his friends. Well, fortunately, they didn't have any of the same classes, and they didn't ride the bus together, so he didn't have to deal with him. A few days later, Paul was looking through his mom's photos to find pictures for a timeline project that he had for school. And he came across a photo of him and Jimmy in the sandbox. They were both driving a truck and making faces and looking like they were having a great time. He knew he wasn't really mad at Jimmy, and he also knew that he had to do something to make things right. So he printed out the picture, and he took it to school with him the next day. He saw Jimmy at his locker, and after he walked away, he slid that photo into one of the slots in the top of the locker. And later that day, Jimmy opened his locker, and out fell a photo with a note on the back that said, "I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings and made you move away." Well, at lunchtime, Paul sat with his friends that he always sat with, and he was really nervous. He didn't know how Jimmy was going to react or if he would say anything to him at all. But he looked up, and there was Jimmy coming toward him with the photo in his hand. And he said, "That was a great sandbox. My family didn't move away because you said I was stupid." So you do remember that, huh? Yeah, I remember. I felt bad for a little while, but we were just kids and you were being the boss, and I was pretty stupid about trucks. I still am. It's okay. "Oh, thanks," said Paul. "I felt really bad. I should have said something at the time. I just didn't know how." Forget about it," said Jimmy. "You're probably really stupid about guitars." "You mean there's more than one kind?" said Paul. "Yeah, there's a few. I guess you don't play music, huh?" "Nah, I'm still into trucks, big ones now. Me and my dad are fixing up an old pickup that hopefully is going to run by the time I learn how to drive." "Huh. Do you still have the sandbox?" "No, that's gone. There's a basketball hoop there now." "Well, that's cool. Maybe I could come over and we can shoot hoops sometime." "Yeah, that'd be great," said Paul. I'll talk to my mom about it tonight." "Yeah, me too," said Jimmy. "Well, see ya." And he went off to have lunch with his friends. "Yeah, see ya," said Paul, and he knew this time that he really would. But the next day, school was closed because everybody was getting sick and everyone had to stay home. But fortunately, there is FaceTime and Zoom, and you can still shoot baskets in your driveway if you stay away from each other. And so Paul and Jimmy started becoming friends all over again, even though the world got really weird. We all do things that hurt other people at times, and it is important to say that we're sorry. It feels bad when we've hurt someone, and that's how we know that we need to apologize. When we apologize, it gives the other person a chance to forgive us, and it gives us a chance to forgive ourselves. So be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I'm looking forward to the day when we can really be together again. But until then,
During the month of May, we are sharing our collection with NAMI New Hampshire. NAMI New Hampshire is a grassroots organization working to improve the quality of life for all by providing support, education, and advocacy for people affected by mental illness and suicide. Comprised of a network of affiliate chapters and support groups, staff and volunteers, NAMI New Hampshire provides information, education, and support to all families and communities affected by mental illness and suicide. Please give as you are able to help achieve a future where people affected by mental illness have hope, help, and health, and are able to access the supports and evidence-based treatment necessary for recovery, have a lifespan that is not cut short by suicide or co-occurring conditions, and reach their full potential living in their communities free from discrimination. The instructions for giving are on your screen.
Each week we stop for a couple moments of prayer to remember, to talk about, to think about all those things that are heavy on our hearts and our mind, and also those things that give us great joy. And this week we are just so delighted to announce that on May 10th, the granddaughter of Louise Cameron was born. She is Abby Susan. She weighed over 8 pounds, and her mother is Emily Austin. And we can barely wait until we can meet that new baby. In this time of so many changes, so many pains and losses, it is wonderful to be able to celebrate new life come to us, and new life come to that family. We wish you the very, very best. My prayer this morning finds me wondering and thinking about the ambiguities of life, the things that I have no control over, the limitations that I have. And when I think about that, I think about the ambiguity, new life, joy, pleasure, springtime, everything bursting around us, the pleasure of a walk with our furry friends, with our family, with our loved ones, being outside, watching trees and listening to birds. And you all seem to have an abundance of bluebirds of happiness around you. And that makes me feel good. It makes me feel glad. And I'm so happy for all of us. And then the other part of life, the loss. Many of you have parents who are ill. We've had deaths in this congregation of, no, not just from COVID, but from other illnesses. We've had people who suffered strokes, who suffering from job losses, who their own health has been compromised, who are struggling with children who are home from school and whose life is just tossed upside down and unable to have graduations and all the things that are important. And so I find myself sad and this confusion. And so I ask you to join with me as we wrestle with this. The Holy One of Spirit, we don't know what this will all bring in our lives, but we do know that the time we have now is the only time that we have. So let us learn how to embrace our limitations. Let us learn how to say the lamentations, the pains, express them, our anxieties, to let us not be alone. And let us celebrate all the good things that we have in our life. Let us remember that we have one another. We have our family. We have our friends. We have much to be grateful for. And we respect that, as well as mourn with this whole world that is in such a crisis time. May it be so. And now I would invite you to write your prayer concerns in the chat line. You may list your name, your event, what you're struggling with, or what you're celebrating, your own ambiguities. Share them with us. And then we can be in touch with you. We can hold you in our hearts as you express those concerns. There will be a time for writing. There will be time for watching a very lovely, peaceful scene that I invite you to meditate on, to put yourself in that path of water, that ever-flowing love and life. And then after a moment of silence, we will begin our service with a sermon message. May you know that you are held in love. So be it. Amen.
As we move now from this time of meditation, I invite you to listen to the words of Julie Dougherty in her song, Tiny Reconciliations. This song was the inspiration for this worship service today.
She sits on her back porch, all alone, listening to the cricket's evening song. She's in the autumn of her season. Can the frost be very long? Oh, how a day is like a lifetime. The clock stealing moments, just like a thief. I'm sorry, she whispers to her memories with the faintest sigh of relief. Tiny insignificant, and yet tiny reconciliations may be all we ever get. If she could only take back all of the hurtful things that she had ever said, and all the big mistakes she ever made, and substitute instead tiny reconciliations, insignificant, and yet tiny reconciliations may be all we ever get. And in the quiet of the evening, as shadows recede, tiny reconciliations may be all we really need. Fault and folly will always be a part of human destiny. An open heart can teach us to live. The past is done, forever gone. What remains and carries on is our willingness to forgive. And in the quiet of the evening, as shadows recede, tiny reconciliations may be all we really need. Ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Good morning. It's so good to be with you this morning. I want to start by thanking Julie Dougherty once again for allowing me to use her creative work to discuss a spiritual issue. I'm sorry, she whispers to her memories with the faintest sigh of relief. An open heart can teach us to live. The past is gone, forever done. What remains and carries on is the willingness to forgive. I wonder if there's anything more complex in our lives than forgiveness. All through our next few moments together, I invite you to let your mind drift and think about the times that you have been touched by forgiveness. Perhaps someone has forgiven you. Perhaps you have forgiven someone else. Perhaps you have even managed to forgive yourself. I imagine there will be instances of all three of these as you reflect. And I forgive you in advance if you miss a few of my words. No apologies necessary. Our theme this month is thresholds. When Lori Bilby asked me to lead worship service today, I was ready. I had just recently listened to Julie's CD, In This Place. And as I heard tiny reconciliations for the, I don't know how manyth time, I thought, now here is a song worthy of a worship service. The image of a woman sitting in the autumn of her season on her porch, I picture in a rocking chair, reflecting on her life and making her apologies. Then Lori and I had a good laugh. The threshold that this woman is sitting on is not exactly the most uplifting for us in a time when our world is in disarray and the future can seem very scary. Perhaps it would be better to concentrate on forgiveness and not emphasize the idea of the threshold. What I have come to think along the way of preparing these remarks today, however, is that we cross thresholds all the time in our lives. We are regularly in an autumn season. At this time of year, when education is coming to an end and diplomas and degrees are being awarded, many young people stand on the threshold and are ready to move into adult life. For all of us, thresholds exist throughout our lives. Jobs are lost and new ones are found, and those are seasons ending. Marriages end. We lose loved ones, sometimes all too often. And as these seasons end and we stand on thresholds, forgiveness is always at issue. There are, after all, some threads that permeate all seasons. Hurtful things have been said. Big mistakes have been made. Think about the seasons of our own lives, how we look back on them once we have crossed a threshold. Has there been any in which hurtful things have not been said, in which big mistakes have not been made? Is there ever a time when the need for forgiveness is absent? The past is done, forever gone. What remains and carries on is our willingness to forgive. One key to forgiveness is the appreciation of the human condition. Fault and folly will always be a part of human destiny. We UUs have a deep understanding that we are all flawed human beings. Yet we commit each week to celebrating the worth and dignity of every person. Worth and dignity, every person, no matter how flawed. So what does it mean to forgive another person? The classic definition of forgiveness goes something like this. Forgiveness is the intentional and voluntary process by which a victim undergoes a change in feelings and attitude regarding an offense. Or more briefly, to give up resentment, to pardon, to waive any negative feelings or desire for punishment, to stop blaming or being angry with someone for something that person has done. What struck me as I found these various definitions was the focus on the person doing the forgiving. What is involved here is an individual decision to give up resentment, to pardon, to stop being angry. Forgiveness is an intentional act. Its impact, first and foremost, is on the person doing the forgiving. Two more references I found underscored this notion of forgiveness as an internal action. In the Bible, the Greek word translated into English as forgiveness literally means to let go, as when a person does not demand payment for a debt. Psychologists also generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate action to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve the forgiveness. Regardless of whether they actually deserve the forgiveness. For many years, long after our professional association had ended, I was adamantly resentful of a former colleague. I felt she had betrayed our friendship by the way she acted at work. When her name was mentioned, I would make some snarky remark and let it be known that I had no respect for her. It took me about a decade to realize that by holding on to this resentment, I was only hurting myself. Perhaps it is fair to give South Church some credit for how I finally came to forgive. Fault and folly will always be a part of human destiny. Somewhere along the way of my spiritual journey here, I internalized this notion of human nature and what it means in everyday life. The fault and folly are usually not one-sided. I came to admit to myself that I had surely a role in what had happened between us, even if I couldn't see it clearly. I could imagine that the hurt was on both sides. I wrote her a letter saying that I was sorry that we had separated on such unhappy terms, and I wanted to apologize for my part in how that happened. She wrote a lovely letter back, and that was the end of our conflict. I have not stayed in touch. Now, however, when I think of her with a smile. When we harbor anger and resentment and withhold forgiveness, we hurt ourselves. Such negative emotions can rob us of happiness, restrict our lives, even make us miserable. When I came to understand that my righteous resentment was only hurting myself, it was possible to take an action of forgiveness. Ethicist and theologian Lewis Sneads put it more succinctly. Forgiveness is to set a person free and discover that that person is you. At this point, I can't resist this ironic twist. Last Thursday morning, as I was preparing to record this sermon, when I opened my email, there was a Facebook post asking me to send a friend request. Guess who it was from? The Universal Vibes, at work once more. I could only turn to Carlo and say, woo! Thoughts for perhaps a future sermon. Of course, forgiveness often has some prerequisites. A person is apologizing or making a peace offering, for example. In those instances, an act of contrition and the recipient act of forgiveness set two prisoners free. Our happiness in life also requires that we are able to forgive ourselves. Just as it took a long time for me to acknowledge that the fault and folly was not one-sided, it can take a long time for us to accept that we, too, are so flawed to have said hurtful things and made big mistakes. When a loved one dies, a parent, a spouse, a beloved friend or relative, we are left with no opportunity for contrition, for receiving forgiveness, and we are hit hard. We are left with open wounds. Perhaps we didn't say, "I love you," often enough. Perhaps there were hurtful words, not apologized for. Perhaps we are holding resentments we failed to express. Perhaps those big mistakes caused harm we could never repair. In our grief, we may fixate on what we could have done better. At the memorial service for my wife, Donna, Frank Clarkson gave a message that I have taken to heart more times than I can count. He said, "I did not see Jim and Donna much after I learned about her diagnosis. I intended to, and I knew they had a steady stream of visitors. I kept them in my prayers, but I have to confess, I was busy, and I didn't show up like I could have. I tell you this because I suspect that some of you may be feeling the same thing, thinking, I could have done more. If so, please hear me right now. At this moment, I ask you to let go of any regret you have about what you did or did not do. Do not live with your regrets. They are only love's way of acknowledging that we can never do enough for the people we love. Do not live with your regrets." Frank's counsel to those assembled has helped me to do what can be the hardest forgiveness work of all, to forgive oneself. Fault and folly will always be ever part of human destiny. Tiny reconciliations, insignificant and yet tiny reconciliations may be all we ever get. Tiny reconciliations, insignificant and yet tiny reconciliations may be all we ever need. No one is exempt. Human destiny encompasses us all. Just as we are able to forgive others by accepting their faults and folly, their flaws, so too must we accept and come to forgive our own. This is an understanding that it is possible to embrace. For once we embrace that our forgiveness will be universally and continually required for others and for ourselves, to forgive can become what you refer to as a spiritual practice. The more often and more willingly we embrace forgiveness, the easier and more ingrained it becomes to forgive. We let go of the hurts and resentments more readily. Our lives are less encumbered and less restricted, and we are happier. It is our calling to build lives of integrity. That is a day-to-day process, leaving yesterday's work behind. The past is done, forever gone. What remains and carries on is our willingness to forgive. Evangela megachurch minister T.D. Jakes put it this way: I think the first step is to understand that forgiveness does not exonerate the perpetrator. Forgiveness liberates the victim. It's a gift you give yourself. My wish for all of us today is the liberation of forgiveness. May it be so.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts till we are together again.
Just as we are able to forgive others by accepting their fault and folly, so too must we accept our own. My wish for us all today again, the liberation of forgiveness. Go in peace.
I'll tell you a secret that I've learned. Nobody knows everything. We all get caught up in what we think.